immense pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, Carollyne Conlinn. Carollyne is one of the prayer chaplains here at Unity. She is one of the founders of an international coaching organization. She is the proud mother of two and the even more proud grandmother of two. So please warmly welcome Carollyne Conlinn.
Thanks, Shirley. I was thinking as I was preparing this talk, which of course it's been stewing in my brain ever since Randy invited me to do this, about what is this mothering? What is this job description that nobody ever prepared me for? And yet it's the one I'm most proud of, the one that fills me up. And this universal experience of being mothered is one we all have in common. We were all birthed. Some of us have also had the experience of birthing. And our experience of birthing certainly came with gifts and challenges. And as I was, looking back and forth at all of the things that have been said about mothering, and, of course, it's all over the internet right now, I came across this quote from Oprah. And this quote became the touchstone for me. She says, "The choice to become a mother is the choice to become one of the greatest spiritual teachers there is." So this really inspired me and my reflection for today, and I thought about Oprah, who herself had a very challenging relationship with her mother. There's a story that she shares about at the age of 6, being sent to her mother to live with her, and her mother was a teenage mom and, had a difficult life. And so Oprah was sent from her grandmother to live with her mother in a rented room. And there was no room for Oprah in that room. So she slept on the porch outside the house. That was her introduction to living with her mother. However, she'd been taught by a loving grandmother about God. And so, according to her, without shedding a tear, she spent that night and many other nights praying to God, her Father, and Jesus, her brother. And as we all know today, she is a woman who is recognized as a spiritual leader in her own right, and her spiritual children are many. Not all of us have birthed a child, nor see ourselves as spiritual leaders. Some of us have been fathers, aunts, uncles, grandparents, step-parents, whose care and concern has been a strong foundation for growing children. And I'm sure all of us have birthed an idea. So what does birthing and then mothering have to teach us about our spiritual journey? Well, I've spent some time thinking about that, because this is the year in which I've spent exactly the same amount of time having a mother and then being a mother, because I was a late mother. I became a mother at 37. So preparing for this talk brought up all these feelings of inadequacy about mothering. Nobody gave me the job description. And as I interview others about their mothers or their mothering, I found out I'm not alone in this. And at the same time, on reflection, I connected with the immeasurable joy of that job as I think about the beautiful adults my children have become. And my daughter showed up today. So, what I know is that the real job of mothering is definitely not the Hallmark card version. In fact, Anna Jarvis, the woman who first introduced Mother's Day to her Methodist church in 1908, spent the rest of her life fighting the commercialization of the celebration she started. Today is the most lucrative day of the year, just in case you want to know that. Even more lucrative than Christmas. So when we evaluate the commercial Hollywood version, mothering is an impossible dream, or maybe nightmare. In contrast to that definition, what is most priceless about motherhood and mothering is how that job of being a spiritual teacher can be embraced as a journey of the Spirit. It's a learning journey, every minute of it. Our family, over the last 9 months, has been very attentive to mothering as we watched my daughter-in-law, Jessica, and my son, Russell, prepare for parenting their son, who was born exactly 12 days ago, roughly now. Yes, thank you. I had so much to do with it. And I remember my own pregnancy as a blissful time with the occasional discomfort. Jessica, on the other hand, had a really difficult time from the beginning to the end, with lots of pain on a daily basis. My prayers were for her safety and that of her son. So the relief of the birth, the joy of a perfect human emerging into this world, just reminded me of the miracle of every birth, the birth of every person in this room. No matter how many children are born, and according to UNICEF in 2013, for some reason there are no more recent stats I could find, there are 255 children born every minute on this planet. More than the number of people in this room. And every single one of them is a miracle. Of course, that's the easy part in a way. Not that birthing is always easy, but from there the real work begins. That is, teaching an infant to become a person. Or perhaps more accurately, observing an infant become a person, with all the opportunities to shape and guide and celebrate along the way. So as I thought about this, there are three kind of parts of mothering that really emerged for me. And they are surrender, discernment, and release. So as I think about my own life and that of people I know and that of people we all know, I want to just reflect a little on each of those things. So surrender is the requirement to let go of certainty and embrace the uncertainty of parenting or the spiritual journey. Consider or remember, if you can, the first moment when you connected with the divine or with your higher self, as we speak about it at Unity. Often there are feelings of perhaps relief, delight. For some it's ecstasy. For some it feels like answering a call. And as I thought about that, I was imagining what it felt like to be Mary, a teenage mother receiving a message from an angel, a visit, to say, you're going to become the mother of Jesus. And here's what he's going to be. He is going to teach the world what it looks like for God to be in human flesh. Think about your own teenagehood. How would you have received that message? Her cousin Elizabeth had the similar visitation. There are other encounters in the Bible that are more dramatic as well. Saul, on the road to Damascus, struck by a blinding light that changed the rest of his life, from being a persecutor to a proselytizer for the early Christian church. So we have examples of what that initial response is, invitation is. It takes many forms, and yet it is clear. I was listening to the story of Jean Vanier on the way as I was driving here, a spiritual leader in our own country who has taken his work globally. And he told a story of how he wanted to join the Navy at 13 in the middle of the war, and how his mother absolutely refused to allow that to happen. And he went to his father in that case and sat with his father, insisting that that's what he wanted to do. His father saying, "No, you're too young. No, you can't do this. Your mother will be too frightened." Until, through deep listening, he actually saw his son. And his answer was, "You go, I trust you." To me, that is the essence of what mothering does. So we sign up for a job that is ever expanding. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes less, always moving forward. And by staying the course, by developing stamina and habits that can sustain our growth, we as mothers and our children reach our destination, and as spiritual travelers, we all reach our destination. And what is that destination? So in mothering, the arrival of the baby signals the beginning of a new relationship. As parents or larger family, can you remember the awe, exhaustion, exhilaration, the thrill of that birth, that new life arriving? And as I was writing this, I received the picture of my grandson, and it was like, oh yeah, that's how it really looks. However, it's the start of a really much longer journey. And in our spiritual life, arriving at our spiritual home can feel like a destination. So how many of you came to Unity and thought, yeah, this is it, I'm home? Once you get here, then what? What does it take to actually stay the course as a spiritual seeker? There are very few successful shortcuts to pregnancy. And the same is true, I think, for our spiritual life. The initial connection is important, and then it turns on a whole chain of events, which require the second piece of mothering, and that is discernment. That is the ability to judge well. And as we're spiritual seekers, the ability to get guidance and gain understanding. Many of you know that the job of parenting is never over. Just when you think they've mastered a new level of growth, crawling, for example, it's almost automatic that you, as the parent, or I, as the parent, started to anticipate them walking. Children are built for growth, and it's hard for parents to keep up. Just when one phase is manageable, some other growth spurt kicks in, and adjustments are needed all over again to accommodate the new phase. So, operating under those conditions, the natural order sometimes gets thrown off by a parent who wants too much too soon, or too little too late. That can be a recipe for exceptional growth for everyone involved. Or, as it was for Oprah, in her case, it was an impetus for incredible growth. Where that came from, where that came out of her soul to offer to the rest of the world such a gift of love and understanding and growth. If handled poorly, it can also be a recipe for exceptional resentment, eventual resentment, depending on how the parent can attend to the spiritual needs of the child or the emotional needs of the child. So, as well for us on our spiritual journey, there are times when we can rest in the peace of knowing, this is a place I can just relax. I've gained this new insight and understanding. And in both those situations, the child learning something new, us reaching a new goal, it's usually short-lived. Because the discerning parent, as the discerning soul traveler, understands that moments of peace are time to reflect, sink into gratitude, and then wait for the next level of unfolding. I was thinking about some of the discerning mothers that have raised some of our modern spiritual teachers. So, first one who came to mind was Gandhi. Here's what he said: "Seeing God face to face is to feel that he is enthroned in our hearts, even as a child feels a mother's affection without needing any demonstration." And while Gandhi had many influences in his life, none was greater in his spiritual development than his own mother, who was a very spiritual aspirant. She upheld love as the meaning of love to be willing sacrifice for another. And in his words, she was deeply religious. Gandhi recalls how as a child, he and his siblings would wait for his mother to come to have breakfast with them, because during the fast, the strictest times of their religious holidays, she refused to eat before the sun touched her face. And for her, religion wasn't a separate compartment of her life, nor was it for Gandhi. He recalls that she had a really strong vein of common sense and political astuteness that was sought after by many in the community, so he learned. He learned from an early age what that looked like. And before he left for his graduate studies or law studies in England, she asked him to take 3 vows, which are famous, I'm sure, and which he did take on in earnest. That was no meat, no women, and no alcohol. He lived up to those, and he actually did not see his mother again after he left on that trip. So she remained in him. And I thought about Mother Teresa. What kind of mother did she have? She was born the last of 3 children to Nicola and Drana Phil, who were Albanian grocers. Her mother, deeply religious, and instilled in her a love of charity that her daughter, of course, exemplified in the world. And I was touched because at the age of 9, her father died. And so her close-knit family was kind of disrupted. And I could resonate with that because my father died when I was 14. And I imagine how the family was strengthened around her mother in that moment, and how it marked her. So, there are many stories about mothering. You all have your own stories about mothering. What about them? And one story about my own mother that I remember is being in such turmoil about whether to take a job in our head office, which was in Toronto, and I was in Montreal working at the Olympics. And I had asked all kinds of people, what should I do? Should I take this job or not? Finally, of course, I phoned my mother. And her advice, simple: why not give it a try? You can always change your mind if it's not working for you. So I relaxed and took the job, discovering more of myself along the way. And just yesterday, I heard myself giving my daughter the same advice as she's facing big decisions in her life. My mom was a woman of deep faith, and I'm sure she followed her own advice as she became an entrepreneur at 39 after my father's death. Her partner was God, and from that place, she was able to overcome the shock, the grief, and surely feelings of inadequacy as she faced with her children, aged 3 to 14. She operated our family's tourist business long enough to prove to the skeptics, and probably to herself, that she could do it. And so from that, we all have stories, we all have moments with our mothers, some of which we might call positive, some of which we might not call positive, and yet all of which have contributed to the person we are today. In fact, sometimes it's the failings of the parent-child relationships that become the impetus for soul-searching growth for therapy, for restorative self-care, that have become very helpful additions to our culture today. It might not be the biological mother who provides the best mothering to a child. Everyone in this room, perhaps, has had a child that you have been able to guide and grow and fill that nurturing, deeply held listening for a child. This church family is a real opportunity to add to what we might have missed somewhere along the line, or an opportunity to give nurturing to someone else. I'm thinking of the Soul Journey group that Shirley Vollett has started, and that many people find such a beautiful way of hearing and being heard in our soul growth. Prayer chaplains every Sunday morning offer this way of listening that attends to the joy or pain of whatever is current for people who come forward. We have spiritual practices like Randy's meditation classes, Janet's unity study groups, all of which are different ways that we can come together and grow ourselves past that magical moment of our own birth. And so that could be enough. That could be enough about mothering. But there's one more element that I think is perhaps the trickiest, and that is release, which I will define as letting go and letting God. My own mom had to let go of her job and find another, eventually becoming the dean of women at a nursing school where the nurses, loved her. I was really grateful to to write her story as part of Marilyn Norrie's early workshops, because we got to read it, I got to write it and edit it with her, and we really shared more about her own story and how I saw her. Neither of my sisters recognized the mother that I saw, which is pretty normal, I think. Well, they recognized her, but they would have written a different story. For me, it was really a heartwarming bond that I now cherish. And she was happy to share with others. Even though she's not here in the flesh, we have that story that we shared. And so I feel her with me often, like today especially. Sometimes discernment goes off the rails, leading to difficult relationships between mothers and their children. I can think of a couple of times, and probably my daughter can think of more, when my mothering really fell short of my desire to be the ever-available listening ear that I aspire to be. I just couldn't figure out the handbook. Drugs were showing up in schools at a time when they hadn't before. Challenges to self-esteem in young women that are very common now, but were new in my world. And so I had to turn to my spiritual roots. And even today, my best antidote to my parental worry, or any other for that matter, is the prayer for protection that I learned right here. I say it often, especially in the middle of the night, and use their name as, the object of that prayer. So I think it is the trickiest stage, this stage of releasing, bringing back close from that moment of birth when the mother begins to release her child, when something else calls us. No longer is that child safely inside the mother. She now has a living, breathing human who has needs and wants. So there are many moments of sadness and joy for both mother and child. And there are the conscious releases: school, new job, new relationship. There are also many that catch us by surprise. I remember breaking down when I was clearing out the baby clothes from the drawers that they'd lived in for, probably 2 years at that point. knowing that that era was over and that something new was going to be asked of me. There are these moments where if you pay attention, there will always be ways that our children will continue to need us in our lives. More difficult, perhaps, is when it's time for the mother to be released by the child. So mom gets hit by a difficult circumstance. Or even more painful when mom disappears into some form of dementia, and the child loses that relationship that's been so familiar for their whole life. What does our spiritual life teach us about release on a human level? And so what we've learned here is daily prayer and meditation are practices that allow us to release fears every day. As our bodies are cleared, our minds are released, and we're available for new thought, for new connections. And I believe it's in divine order that this cycle repeats itself over and over and over again. So sometimes it's the release that invites new surrender and opens the door for new discernment, only to be followed by, oh, I guess it's time to let that go. So when I get complacent, think I'm caught up with my son or my daughter, and something changes, I'm thrown into surrender. I am. And if I'm lucky and in tune with my spirit, I quickly discern how to back off, or how to wait for the right moment, or simply smile and enjoy the situation. Release, when consciously practiced, becomes more like breathing than about a severed limb somewhere. And for those of us who've birthed an idea, we may find parallels in our own creative process. How many of you right now are in the middle of birthing a new idea? Many of us. And so I believe there are things to be learned from the emotional life that we're invited into as humans grow. A word from Jean Vanier, whose, I think, mothering spirit enlivened the world. His advice to us: listen well and trust yourself. In closing, I just want to share this quote from Myrtle Fillmore, who is aptly described as the mother of unity. So here's her Mother's Day gift to all of us. I trust that each new day brings you new light, new joy, new manifestation of the Christ life, and love, and substance, and power from within. As we go into this beautiful day that is meant to honor mothering, connect to the stories of your own mothers, share them with each other, and grow your own capacity to listen and trust yourself. I'd like to share with you this prayer for protection, this version of the prayer for protection that Shirley Thompson brought to us when she was at Unity Village. Is that okay? So I would love you to just settle for a moment, close your eyes if you like, and just listen to these words that are so familiar to us and yet have an added depth. The light of God surrounds us. I am light. The love of God enfolds us. I am love. The power of God protects us. I am power. The presence of God watches over us. I am presence. Wherever we are, God is. I am divine. And so it is.